Please turn in your Bibles to Psalm 68. We continue our study of the Psalms. Most of the ones we've studied so far were written, we believe, by David, and that's the case again this evening, the Psalm 68. Last time we studied 66 and 67. The 66th Psalm, we think not written by David, but talked about how that the people should rejoice for God's blessing to them, in particular that they had led the people out of Egyptian slavery. But he had tested and refined them. There was something we did, we're not sure exactly what it was, perhaps a captivity, maybe the Babylonian captivity, but he sent them, but brought them out of it, and so they should serve him and be faithful to him. And the 67th Psalm last time talked about how all nations, people of all nations, should praise God. They should rejoice in his righteous judgment. If they would praise and serve him faithfully, then he would bless them, and the earth would yield or increase. Okay, so that's where we are as we get ready for Psalm 68 this evening. Questions, comments before we start Psalm 68? Anybody? All right, we have a long psalm, and hopefully we'll be able to finish it tonight. I hope so. Let's read the first 16 verses. Psalm 68, verses 1 through 16. Who'd like to read 1 through 16 for us, please? Bill, verses 1 through 16, please.
Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered. Let those also who hate him flee before him. As smoke is driven away, so drive them away. As wax melts before the fire, so let the wicked perish at the presence of God. But let the righteous be glad, let them rejoice before God. Let them rejoice exceedingly. Sing to God, sing praises to his name. Extol him who rides on the clouds. By his name, Yahweh, and rejoice before him. A father of the fatherless, a defender of widows. In God, in his holy habitation, God set the solitary in families. He brings out those who are bound into prosperity, but the rebellious dwell in a land dry. O God, when you went out before people, when you marched through the wilderness, the earth shook, and heavens also dropped rain in the presence of God. Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God, and the God of Israel. You, O God, sent a plentiful rain, whereby you confirmed your inheritance when it was weary. Your congregation dwelt in it. You, O God, provided from your goodness for the poor. The Lord gave the word great, was the company of those who proclaimed it. Kings of armies flee, they flee, and she who remains at home divides the spoil. Though you lie down among the sheepfold, you will be like the wings of a dove covered with silver, and her feathers with yellow gold. When the Almighty scattered kings in it, it was white as snow in Zalmon. A mountain of God is the mountain of Bashan. A mountain of the many speaks, the mountain of Bashan. Why do you fume with envy, you mountains of many peaks?
Right, not quite through yet. There was 16, Bill.
16?
Yes.
Why do you fume with envy, you mountains of many peaks? This is a mountain which God desires to dwell in. Yes, the Lord will dwell in it forever.
Okay. In my question during the assignments, I make the point that most students, at least the ones that I have read after, consider this to be one of the hardest of the Psalms to understand. Fortunately, Terry has assured us she knows the answers to all the questions this evening. Oh, actually, that's not quite what she said, but anyway. We have some very symbolic language. We've seen that many times. A lot of it in this chapter. We'll see what we can do. Okay, but we'll start off with question number 1. First 4 verses there. God talks about how his enemies will be treated. And there's the illustrations, symbolic language. Put some things he says about how he treats his enemies, and we'll see this come up again and again throughout the psalm. How does he treat his enemies? Karen.
They are scattered, they flee before him, and they are driven away.
Okay, they're scattered, and what was the second one? They flee before him, and they're driven away. Okay. He uses some illustrations to illustrate the effect on them. What are some of the illustrations that he uses? Bill?
As smoke is driven away, so drives them away.
All right, smoke is driven away by the wind.
Wax melts before the fire, the wicked perish at the presence of God.
All right, wax will melt before a fire. In the same way, God's enemies pass away before him. Okay? So, that introduces the concept of the psalm. God scatters his people, his enemies. Now we see he cares for those who serve him. The righteous should rejoice, but his enemies are scattered. Questions, comments on those first 4 verses? I asked you a question there, a thought question, and the more I think about this thought question, the more I think it's important. Why did God consider certain nations to be his enemies? And related to that, why do we, and this is a question we've dealt with a number of times, but why would God so often be involved in war with his nation against other nations? What was it, and we don't have it in the New Testament, where God's people are told to go to physical war. We have spiritual but not physical war. Why so much physical war? Why would God consider other nations to be his enemies? Okay, Rick?
Well, you read the minor prophets and through the prophets, and so many nations was involved in idol worship, harlotry, and human pleasures that they wanted, and they didn't believe in any God that was against any of them things. They wanted to believe how they believed.
Okay, I think those are important points, especially the aspect of the idolatry. Other comments? Jason?
Come from his own people, Cain, Esau, Ishmael, the people that he created, he made, give them promises, and then through the years they just kind of went their own way.
And not only went their own way, they did evil against Israel, God's people. Okay, I thought I saw some other hands. I see some other hands. Terry does have an answer.
What I was thinking about was the physical warfare was to show God's true displeasure and what was going to happen to people who worshipped idols and who rejected the one true God who had made them and given them everything.
Okay, all right. Good thought, Sharon.
James 4, verse 4 says, friendship with the world is enmity with God. Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. And so building on what Terry said, the Old Testament was very physical, things that you could literally see, a physical kingdom, literal building for a temple. And so this foreshadows the spiritual warfare in the New Testament, but God wanted us to see how strongly he feels about people who won't serve him.
Okay. Let me add something to all of that, and this is the thing that is more and more is impressed on my mind. Under the Old Testament, back to Rick's point about idolatry. At that time, in those societies, it appears to me that a nation would identify with a god. And when the nation went to war against another nation, it was understood that the gods were warring against one another. And so for one nation to win, that was like their god was winning, was more powerful than the other god. Put that in the context of the nation of Israel. Israel also had their God. The true God, not an idol, the true God, but their God, not the other idols. Other nations had other gods, false gods. And so quite frequently, it seems to me that it brought out that when the other nations attacked Israel, they were basically opposing God. Just the very fact that they attacked his nation was an affront against God. And his allowing his nation to go to war and win the victory was an honor to him, that he was the true God. Now, maybe we haven't discussed that aspect of it before, but can you think of scriptures or concepts that show that idea, as we have studied, that the conflict between Israel and these other nations was a conflict between their gods, him being the true God? Think of any examples of that, or things that relate to that? Susie, has your hand up?
I have a thought. I don't have a particular passage, but frequently when God's power was demonstrated to the pagan nations, they would respond, your God. They wouldn't say the God, they would say your God.
And the same thing with their God. This would be their God, and you have your God. Okay? Other examples? Okay, Jason.
The Exodus, God used Moses to show Pharaoh who the one true God was. And he said, by the end of this, he'll know that I am who I am.
Yes, and in fact, God said that the nation, everybody will know. The Israelites would know, the Egyptians would know, Pharaoh would know, and it was a defeat of their gods. The gods of the Egyptians were defeated by the plagues and by what God did in defeating it. So the leaving Egypt was one clear example of it. You think of other examples of it. Sharon.
In 1 Kings 20, when the Syrians are attacking, it says, a man of God came and spoke to the king of Israel and said, thus says the Lord, because the Syrians have said, the God is God of the hills, but he is not God of the valleys. Therefore I will deliver all this great multitude into your hand, and you shall know that I am the Lord.
Notice that. They think that I can't win over here. I can only win in this place, but not that place. I will show them that I am the true God. See, this is, again and again it happens. Other examples. Rick, go ahead.
These other nations, they believed in very many gods for everything. But their gods never spoke to them. They never told them to go do this or go do that. Israel's God led them across the river on a dry bed. And he shone as a star over them, guiding them at night. And when they crossed over into the promised land, he told them, you're going against all these nations. I'm going to give them nations to you.
Okay.
He talked to them and told them his power and showed it to them.
Okay. And we could go on. One example that I want to mention, then we can move on. When Assyria attacked Jerusalem, and the Rabshakeh, remember, challenged the people of Jerusalem. He said, your God can't protect you from us. We've defeated everybody. You can't win against us. You may as well give up. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. But again, you see, it was a challenge to God. The concept of the warfare between the nations was a challenge between their gods. Think about that, and the more I think about that, the more important it seems to me that is. So anyway, this chapter, this psalm, is much about God's relationship to his enemies and the defeat of them. And so it's not just a matter of we want to take your land, and God wants their land, or they want Israel's land. To God, it's a warfare against it's a religious war by its nature, because of by their attacking his people, they're attacking him. Okay, moving on then. Question number 2, verses 5 and 6. There were people, in contrast to the enemies, there were some people that God blessed. And who was that? In verses 5 and 6. Question 2. Whom did God bless, Frank?
He was acted as a father to them and provided for them.
Who?
For the solitary, the widows and the fatherless.
Okay. So he's a father to the fatherless, a defender of the widows. He sets the solitary in families. In other words, people who are lonely, who don't have other people, he gives them people to associate with and to take care of them and so on. And he brings out those who are bound into prosperity. What would that refer to? Bring out those who are bound into prosperity. Those who are bound would be, in the other translations read it somewhat differently. Terry?
Those in bondage.
In bondage.
Bondage to sin or bondage to another, Egypt or...
Yes, okay, which we talked about. And slavery, prisoners, and so forth. Okay, so though he leads in war against his enemies, it's not because he's cruel, it's not because he hates people. There are those who he very much cares for and protects, but not his enemies. Okay? Other comments through verse 6. Okay, question number 3 then. Verses 7 through 10. What does he provide for his people? Or what did he provide for his people in the wilderness? He provided some things for them in the wilderness. What did he provide for them in the wilderness? Karen?
He led them, he sent rain, and provided for the poor.
Okay. Rain. And he says they marched through the wilderness, so he cared for them through the wilderness. And provided for, verse 10, provided goodness for the poor. Now, here's part of the problem that I have with the psalm. When did that happen? Can you think of when this would fit this, Steve?
After the Exodus from Egypt.
Okay. When they were traveling through the wilderness after they left Egypt, that would fit. There's one or two things that I'm not quite sure about, but generally speaking, the earth shook at Mount Sinai. He went before the people with the pillar of cloud by the day and pillar of fire by night, marching through the wilderness and so on. So most of that would fit. There's leading them through the from the land of Egypt and to the land of Canaan. Okay. Other comments to verse 10? Okay. Oh, Sharon.
I think it's noteworthy that in verse 6, the rebellious dwell in a dry land, which is basically a wilderness. And here, God's people also go through the wilderness, but when God's people go through the wilderness, there's water. So the main problem of being in the wilderness, God removes that. He takes care of them. So it's a very different way of being in the wilderness.
Right, which what didn't mean was easy. A lot of times they complained, but it was because of their lack of faith. He would provide for them, and he did in many ways, and they just didn't appreciate it. Okay, so here you see again the contrast to, if this is correct, that we're talking about when they led them out of Egypt, he brought them through the wilderness, gave them manna, gave them the quail to eat, and so forth. Then in contrast with his treatment of the enemies, see how he blesses his people. Okay, because they're his people. Okay, so he blesses them. Okay, other comments? All right, look at verses 11 through 13 then. Question number, okay, thought question on question 1 to 4. 11, I guess we got 11 and 12 yet, don't we? Question number 4. What happened when to the enemies? Verses 11 and 12. What happened to the enemies? Verses 11 and 12. God's leading his people, providing for them. Bill?
They flee.
Right, they flee. Kings of the armies flee. Okay? What else happens? Frank?
But many occasions, when they come against God's army or against the Israelites, many of them died, and then there were some that fled, and when that happened, then they left their spoils behind, and then those that remained at home would divide those spoils.
Okay. And again, the spoils were a symbol of victory. I mean, of course, you would have wealth and so on, but it was also an expression of the victory. This army won the victory. So God is blessing his people by giving them the victory. Now, other comments on 11 to 12? And then I ask you if anybody could explain verse 13 for us. What are the wings of the dove covered with silver and feathers like yellow gold, with yellow gold lying down among the sheepfolds? What's verse 13 have to do with it? Anybody have thoughts on that? Anybody? Going once, going twice. Susie.
Well, different commentaries looked at it differently.
Of course.
What made the most sense to me was like the New King James says, and I forget that though you lie down among the sheepfolds, and there were different versions or different ideas of what sheepfolds meant, but some felt it was within the safety of it was a peaceful place, but others said that meant like ashes or ash heaps. It was a place of not comfort. So though you lie down among the sheepfolds, yet you will be like the wings of a dove. So though it be difficult and hard for you, you will be blessed.
Okay, I think that's clear that whether or not we understand fully the symbolism or even the specific example he may be talking about, that's the bottom line of it, is God's going to bless you. Other comments on it? Terry?
The things that I looked at and read, it talked about the lying down in the sheepfold was discussing people who were hiding and not taking the battle, not going to the battle and hiding, but God was still going to win the battle, and that good was going to come to those who would fight.
Okay, let me give you one other that I got, and obviously I can't prove which one of these is correct. When Israel went to Egypt, what was their occupation? They were shepherds. When they left, what did they take with them? The gold and the silver from the Egyptians. So, if that's what it means, it goes back to their leaving Egypt again. Again, I'm not saying I think that's what that is, but that's one explanation that I've read. Anything else in verse 13? Okay, now, question number 5. Well, we got verses 14 through 17. We didn't read 17, we just read 16. Here we have some more symbolism. He refers to some mountains. In verse 14, the Almighty scattered kings, and it was white as snow in Zalman. And verse 15, mountain of God is the mountain of Bashan, the mountain of many peaks is the mountain of Bashan. Why do you fume with envy, you mountains of many peaks? This is a mountain which God desires to dwell in. Yes, the Lord will dwell in it forever. Okay. So first of all, Zalman. What do you know about Zalman? Anybody have a thought on what Zalman refers to? Terry?
What I studied showed it to really be a small mountain. That it was near Shechem. Okay. And that the snow was a reference to the dead on the mountain, the armor of the kings that had fallen.
Okay. Other comments on Zalman? What event happened at Zalman? There's an event, I don't know whether it proves a whole lot, but there's an event that happened at Zalman in the book of Judges. Okay, Abimelech has been burned down, the tower of Shechem, but near this mountain. Okay? What about Bashan? What do you know about Bashan? Susie?
What did you just say? Go back. What did you just say?
Judges 9:48. Abimelech and his men burned down the tower of Shechem near this mountain in Zalman. That's what I found. I don't know if it proves anything, but that's what reference to Zalman. Okay, Bashan. What do you know about Bashan? Frank.
Land east of the Jordan River.
Okay, east and especially to the north, alongside the Sea of Galilee and further north. But we ought to know something about Bashan. What else do you know about Bashan, Susie?
Well, it's known for its fertile grounds and pastures, trees, strength. It was supposedly the strong power hold. So God compares. Well, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So there's something specific about that happened in Bashan that most of us should know about. Think about it for a while. When Israel was led by Moses coming into the land, they came around to the east side of the Jordan, and what happened? Susie?
Well, that's when Og, King Og from Bashan, and his armies came out and attacked Israel. But God told him not to fear because I've delivered them into your hands.
Okay, and so that was Og, king of Bashan. And that's when Israel conquered Bashan, became their nation. Now, there's also apparently a lot of mountains, beautiful, 7 beautiful mountains in Bashan. So what's the point? Now, in verse 1, here's this Zalman has a snow, has a mountain hill, whatever you call it. Bashan, verse 15, has mountains with many peaks of beauty and so on. But they're fuming with envy. There are mountains and many peaks. Why are they fuming with envy? Anybody figure that part out? Terry?
Because God didn't choose to live there.
What did God choose?
Zion.
God chose Zion, which we're going to get to later on in the chapter. Jerusalem. That's where God chose, not these other places, though they were maybe important places or beautiful places, but that's not what God chose. God chose Jerusalem, Zion, to be the place of worship, where his people would come for the temple and so on. That's all I can get out of it. And that's where God's going to dwell then forever. Last part of verse 16. Questions, comments through 16? Susie?
Well, I can't find my note, but somewhere, on verse 16, where it says, why do you fume with envy? That word literally meant to leap or to spring, and that in Hebrew culture it was very important for soldiers and athletes to have agility. That would be very helpful to them in warfare, and so it was crucial to their survival. And so they would, this idea of fuming with envy would be like being agitated and jumping, and they would watch stealthily, like lying in wait for them, lying in wait to see what they could do to capture or to gain power over God and Mount Zion, because they'd always been the power of the
Okay. All right, that's another viewpoint. Any other comments? Let's go ahead and read the rest of the chapter then. Let's read 17 through the end of 68, which I think is verse 35. Neil, you want to read that for us, please? 17 through 35.
The chariots of God are twice 10,000. Thousands upon thousands. The Lord is among them. Sinai is now in the sanctuary. You ascended on high, leading a host of captives in your train and receiving gifts among men, even among the rebellious, that the Lord God may dwell there. Blessed be the Lord who daily bears us up. God is our salvation. Our God is a God of salvation, and to God the Lord belong deliverances from death. But God will strike the heads of the enemies. The hairy crown of him who walks in his guilty ways. The Lord said, I will bring them back to Bashan. I will bring them back from the depths of the sea, that you may strike your feet in their blood, and that the tongues of your dogs may have their portion from the foe. Your possessions is seen, O God, the possessions of my God, my King, into the sanctuary. The singers in front, the musicians last. Between them, virgins playing tambourines. Bless God in the great congregation, the Lord, O you who are of Israel's fountain. There is Benjamin, the least of them, in the lead, the prince of Judah in their throng, the princes of Zebulun, the princes of Naphtali. Summon your power, O God, the power, O God, by which you have worked for us. Because of your temple at Jerusalem, kings shall bear gifts to you. Rebuke the beasts that dwell among the reeds, the herd of bulls with the calves of the people. Trample underfoot those who lust after tribute, scatters the peoples whose delight in war. Nobles shall come from Egypt. Cush shall hasten to stretch out her hands to God. O kingdoms of earth, sing to God, sing praises to the Lord. To him who rides in the heavens, the ancient heavens, behold, sends out his voice, his mighty voice. Ascribe power to God, whose majesty is over Israel, and whose power is in the skies. Awesome is God from his sanctuary, the God of Israel. He is the one who gives power and strength to his people. Blessed be God.
Okay. So we go back to our questions then. Question number 6. We have a reference in 68:18, referred to in the New Testament. Where is it referred to in the New Testament? How is it used there, Steve?
In Ephesians 4, verse 8, therefore he says, when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive. He gave gifts to men.
Okay. So here we have, back in Psalm 68, the Lord is winning victories over his enemies. And how is it used here? What is the significance of this expression in verse 18, leading captivity captive and ascending on high? Rick?
We see over in Acts 2 that the ascension of Jesus and the giving of spiritual gifts took place.
Okay. All right. Got the comments? Frank?
Well, it talks about, I think it's talking about Jesus descending to the earth and living among wicked men, and then ascending back to heaven, removing sin from men by his sacrifice for those who would receive the gift of salvation.
Okay. So the idea of leading captivity captive is an expression for great victory. The power of captivity has itself been captivated. In other words, it's been defeated. So rather than people being held captive, a victor has come and taken them captive, which in effect releases them. Okay? So it's an expression for great victory. In the Old Testament, as we talked about, God often won victory over the enemies of Israel. In the New Testament, Jesus wins victory over spiritual enemies. Okay? Other comments on verse 18? Okay, there might be more to it than that, but there's at least that much. Okay? Other comments? Okay. So that takes, well, let's see, is there anything else in 19? Okay. So as a result of this, then God gives benefits to his people, the God of our salvation, verse 19. And then question number 7, 20 through 23. We have this very graphic description of the defeat of the enemies. So God's people are given salvation and escape. God gives people the escapes from death But what about the enemies? What does he say about the enemies? Again, highly symbolic language, obviously. So his people are given freedom from captivity and so forth. What about the enemies? Verses 20 through 23. Susie?
He will wound the head of his enemies or strike or crush them, and will crush the scalp or the hairy scalp of those who continue in their sins, to the point that, here again, verse 23, I got different views on that of who's doing this, but anyway, so that you, God's people, may wash your feet in the blood of your enemies, and the tongues of your dogs do the same.
Okay. So whatever it means is obviously a highly symbolic language for victory over the enemies. Again, not necessarily literal, but these other nations were enemies against Israel, therefore enemies against God. God is going to lead to complete defeat of the enemies. Can you think of examples? We've mentioned some already. Can you think of examples where God led Israel to such complete victory over their enemies? What are some examples when this happened? God's leading Israel to victory over people. Terry?
Well, one of the victories was when the whole army of Pharaoh was drowned in the Red Sea. He speaks of bringing them back from the depths of the sea, like it was talking about the Exodus.
So one obvious example was the defeat of the Egyptians. Okay, complete defeat. Then when they got to the land of Canaan, what happened to the nations of Canaan? Complete defeat. Again, at least they were supposed to. They didn't always do what they should have, but that's what God expected of them. Again, because of the idolatry, because of the wickedness of the people there. Okay, Susie.
I have a question on verse 22. I will bring them back from Bashan and from the depths of the sea. I took this as that God would bring the enemies back from Bashan and the depths of the sea. I saw others that thought it was that he would bring perhaps his people, but that didn't make sense to me. Also, Amos, I would go ahead and read it, but Amos 9 verses 1 through 3, I think refers to the enemies. I mean, there's no doubt that it's a similar language and it's referring to the enemies.
Okay. Other comments on the reference to Bashan in 22?
That makes sense if you're talking about Bashan, Og coming from Bashan and the defeat of him. Bringing back the idea of those enemies that they had defeated, even in Egypt and in Bashan, that the blood of those people would be what their dogs licked and all that.
Yeah, that's what I took it to mean too. Admittedly, it's not very clear, but I took it to mean again that they had defeated Og and Bashan in a similar way he would defeat other enemies. That's what. But again, I don't know that I can prove that. Other comments, Rick, and then we'll move on.
Verses 21 and 22 there, I get the feeling that they had the chance to turn and not turn away from their sins. Because it says, but God will wound the head of his enemies, the hairy scalp of the one who still goes on in his trespasses.
Okay, yes. And in fact, didn't they often give a nation an opportunity for peace? Remember, as they were traveling to Israel, they often offered, in fact, Og and King of Bashan, they offered him peace to those nations that wouldn't accept it. And that's why there was war. They wouldn't accept that God was leading his people wherever he wanted them to go. Okay, let's move on. Verse 24. Question number 8, 24 to 27. Here we have a contrast back to, again, contrast to the enemies, back to God's people. What about God's people in 24 to 27? What do you see about them in 24 to 27? Question number 8. Karen.
It seems to be those who are expressing victory. So the procession at the beginning, the singers went before, following with the maidens, with the timbrels, so they're expressing victory.
Okay, it's a victory procession. They've won the battle. Again, symbolically, God defeated the enemies for his people. And here you have the victory procession. 24, you have seen the procession, O God, procession of my God, my King, into the sanctuary. Sing, as Karen pointed out, singers before, players on instruments following, and so on. So the people, verse 28, 26, should bless God. Now there's little Benjamin leading, and the princes of Judah in their company, and princes from Zebulun and Naphtali. What would be significant about Benjamin? Did you get anything about that, verse 27? Why would Benjamin be significant? Comments? Terry?
It stayed with Judah when they divided.
Say again?
Benjamin stayed with Judah when they divided.
Okay. And in Benjamin was Jerusalem. Yeah. So they stayed with Judah, but Jerusalem was technically in Benjamin. They're one of the smallest tribes, but yet the capital city was there. Judah was then south of them, and a major tribe from which the kings came. Zebulun and Naphtali, what would be significant about them? 27. Anything about Naphtali and Zebulun you want to mention? Susie?
The only thing I could find was that their proximity to Jerusalem was further away, so it showed that all the nation was being assembled.
Okay, the whole area, from the north to the south. Judah, okay. All right, so they're all in this procession. They're all giving God glory. Okay, we're going to have to take a break there. So next time maybe we'll spend a little bit more time finishing up 68 and then, 68 and then look at 69 next time. Anything else before we close? Okay, thank you.